Hello, and welcome to Restoring Hope, the podcast of the Missionaries of the Precious Blood. Today, we are honored to have Father Tom Welk as our guest. Father Welk has been involved and has been a chaplain in the, I guess we'll say, hospice arena for many, many years, and he does work at the Harry Himes Memorial Hospice, which is in Wichita. Is that correct, Father Welk?
Correct, yes. It's been over 40 years. I actually helped start this program in the early 80s after I left Newman University.
Oh, great! Oh, great! Okay, well, we've got a lot of questions for you, so we're just gonna start right in. Well, first of all, welcome and thank you for being our guest
Sure,
today.
I'm honored to be asked. Just one other item in terms of personal background. I do lots of work in medical ethics, which goes hand in hand with the work I do in hospice. So that's something that also I'll probably weave into some of my comments in terms of when is enough in terms of medical interventions.
Okay, perfect. And we will get to that. Thank you very much for letting me know that. So, Father Welk, let me ask you, what first drew you to hospice ministry, and how did you discern that calling?
As a priest, I was in a kind of a turning point when I was in undergraduate work, whether I wanted to go into priesthood ministry or whether I wanted to go on to become a physician. So after I left the university and was asked to help start this program, this was kind of hand in glove for me. Doing end of life care really has a lot of overlap with medical work.
Okay. So does your work at Harry Hines reflect your vocation as a missionary of the precious blood?
Yeah, it definitely does. One of the things that we'll probably get into more detail as we go through this podcast is that there's lots of things people need to take care of, what I call the dying role of their life journey. And one of the more important things is really reconciliation. And just to illustrate that point, I walked into the room for this particular patient, and the first thing out of her mouth was, "Thank God for cancer." Oh, I was kind of like you. I furrowed my brow, hopefully not too much, and said, "What's this about?" But I'm wise enough to know to keep my mouth shut, that eventually the woman would let me know. And what was going on, she had a lot of dysfunction in her family. And this allowed her an opportunity to really work at that. When you start looking at death, it can come in a very sudden way, say an accident or a heart attack, precipitous drop, that's the end of my life. Versus with cancer and other life-limiting illnesses, you kind of get a forewarning. And so she was really looking at not a precipitous drop, but cancer, with good treatment, you go down. It's going to have a slope. And that slope was the time she needed. So the social worker and I worked with her to get the family members together. And you can pretty well guess that the last one made that reconciliation, that she died really in 24 hours. So yeah, I see it very much as tying in. That's just one illustration of some of the things that are involved in end-of-life care, when you're really working with someone who needs to put closure to their life journey. And I find it very much in line with the ministry of precious blood reconciliation and spirituality.
Well, you mentioned that. So the precious blood charism emphasizes reconciliation and life-giving presence. But what does that look like at someone's bedside?
At someone's bedside, well, this woman again illustrated it quite well. At the bedside, it's having people come together. It also allows a lot of peace, not just for the person who's dying, but also for those loved ones who still have to continue their life journey. And that makes it also more peaceful for them, knowing that they're now in good terms with their loved one, even if that loved one is no longer around.
Okay. So does hospice, and correct me if I'm wrong here, hospice often speaks about companioning rather than fixing. Is that correct?
Well, a better way, I think, Patrick, that I can frame that is that when you're looking at getting into hospice care and the services we provide, they're no longer going to be directed at aggressive curative intervention. So they've pretty much been told that whatever it might be with regard to their life-limiting illness, say be it cancer, they've exhausted the curative interventions. And now they're no longer going to be looking for aggressive curative care. They're going to be looking for aggressive comfort care. And controlling pain is only one dimension about taking care of someone in that dying role, coming near the end of their life journey. If you look at the question of the difference between pain and suffering, pain deals with the physical dimension of our existence. I hurt, I've got troublesome symptoms, versus suffering is much deeper. And some of the most miserable kind of things that come my way are not in terms of my physical operation, but my psychosocial spiritual. And if you don't address those, you can do all you can to make sure they're kept physically comfortable. But you might still have a miserable human being on your hands if you don't take care of the psychosocial spiritual. And that very much ties in with the ministry that I provide patients. So the difference between pain and suffering again, pain is only one dimension of suffering.
Okay. Okay. So, in terms of the missionaries, the blood of Christ is a sign of a covenant and poured out love. So, how does that imagery influence the way you speak about those things, about suffering, surrender, and trust?
When you're looking at the ministry of reconciliation and precious blood spirituality, maybe a Latin phrase that I'll quickly translate into English, mens sana in corpore sano, that you want everything working together. You want your body to be comfortable, but you also want your heart and your mind and your spirit to be at peace. So a sound mind in a sound body, kind of what that translates into. And it's providing holistic care. We provide healing. We're not into the curative dimension. And the ultimate healing, I'll touch on that later, hopefully with some other comments. The ultimate healing we'll have to go through is death. Because sooner or later, our bodies are going to be so compromised that they no longer will serve that deeper dimension of who we are. Call it personhood, call it spirit, call it soul. That's what really defines us much more deeply than our physical appearance, our physicalness.
Well, let's talk about that ultimate healing since you've touched on it. Can you give us maybe one of the more you've been doing this for 40 years, so can you maybe give us one of the examples
Yeah,
of
literally
some of the more
43. This is my 43rd year.
43? Okay,
Yeah, I
all
mean,
right.
just to be literal here. But yeah, over
No, no,
40
no,
years.
please. So, can you give us one of the more poignant examples of how you've seen that play out? Obviously,
I walked into this, well, we had a patient under care where we have a team meeting all the time. We review. And by the way, we're a large program. We care anywhere from 235 to 250 patients a day. So we're not a little mom and pop outfit. And we review our plan of care for all the patients that we have. And this particular patient was always on a scale, analog scale, 1 to 10, 1 no pain, 10 maximum, always in the upper. But when it came down to it, his particular illness generally did not lend itself to a lot of physical discomfort. But I want to be careful on that because what is pain? Pain is what the patient says it is. So we had to believe that he was really hurting. But no matter what the nurse tried in terms of the amount or the type of opioids, narcotics, still hurting. So, and here's another flag. He would stay awake at night and sleep during the day, and it was wearing his family out. He's being cared for at home. So I went out to see what was going on. And first thing that happened, I visited the family first. I walked in his room, and he looks at me and he says, "Here I am hurting, and they send you out. How in the hell are you going to help me?" So I knew I had to be careful. So I thought, well, a safe topic was it was a hot July day, over 100 degrees here in Kansas. He said, "God, it's hot out." His answer, well, how would I know? I've been in this bedroom, bedbound for the last 3 weeks. So I knew that didn't work. But he had his television on, and I looked up there. The Kansas City Royals, are the ones, the team down here, not the Cincinnati Reds. But anyway, he had the Royals game on. He said, "How are the Royals doing today?" And George Brett, their hero, and this was 1985, mind you. And what was going on was a game. They were doing well, and so we got to talking sports, and he started getting calm and relaxing a little more. And but I wasn't there to talk about the weather or sports. So how do I get to the point of what's really going on in this person? Help him, support him. So I asked him a very neutral, safe question. How long have you been ill? So he gave me a time frame, and he says, "But I don't know what I have." I thought that was kind of strange. I knew exactly. I was obviously very cognizant of what's going on, but I knew not to push him. So he got more serious, and he finally slowed down, and he said, I think what I have begins with a C." Then he stopped, and he didn't say anything. And again, I'm smart enough already, I hope, and wise enough to keep my mouth shut. But then he continues, says, yeah, it begins with a C. And then he shut up, which seemed like an interminable amount of time. I'll tone this down for you, Patrick, but he screamed at the top of his lungs. His family opened the door to look in. And he says, I have cancer! And he's leaned back, and he was just like letting the air out, letting the pressure out. And he says, I didn't think I could ever say that word. Why was that word so hard for him to say? The C word, C in the alphabet is followed by D.
D.
And what's the D word? Dying, death. Could alter denial. Didn't think he could say that word because then he had acknowledged. That's why he stayed awake at night, because he had to keep the Grim Reaper at bay. In the daytime, his family would be watching. So anyway, I dealt with the issues. There were a lot of other things going on, the social worker and I. He had a lot of dysfunction in the family. But his biggest source of suffering, Patrick, was fear of the unknown. Fear of the unknown, which is death, the ultimate.
Yeah.
So anyway, talking about it made it more known. And so I worked with him, and near the end of it all, he acknowledged, he says, I don't know what you do, Tom, but you sure seem to do it well, which was a nice compliment, that we were able to give him that support, that healing now. We were not working in a curative dimension anymore. We were working with wholeness. And the word healing, wholeness, and whole are all from the same Anglo-Saxon word hal. All tie together, mens sana in corpore sano. It's also interesting, Patrick, if I can prolong what you asked for an illustration.
No, please,
I wrote this up for the American Journal of Nursing, and they accepted my article. But the patient had since died, but he was kept more comfortable now physically with less pain medicine, because now he was really dealing with the issues that really were bothering him, that were keeping him wounded. So then the journal asked for documentation. I went back. It was very, very clear that, yes, that was the case, that the medicine was reduced and he was kept more comfortable. And by the way, on that first visit, I called the family the next day and said, how did you do last night? First time in weeks he slept through the night. That's what I'm talking about, ministry of healing, of reconciliation, of bringing peace.
Do you attribute that to the fact that he was able to acknowledge what he had, and maybe that brought on any kind of
he had kept it
sense
bottled
of
up, and that
relief?
was really eating away at him. And he was much, much less hostile on successive visits with my coming to help him out, deal with his issues.
Well, you'd mentioned earlier, that a nurse's aide came in, and hospice care is obviously a team sport. How do chaplains, nurses, aides, social workers, volunteers work together to care for the whole person?
When you're looking at what we do in hospice, the client in most of mainstream medicine is the patient. For us, the client is the patient and family. And truth be known, many times we spend more time with the family members than we do with the patient. Sometimes the patient's in a coma, is out of it. But that team you're asking about, we look at 4 areas of general care. Now, we don't sort out that neatly into 4 areas of our existence. We have a body, we have feelings, we have connection, social, and we have spiritual needs. And so the team we put together, interdisciplinary team, deals with those. Our chaplains, I only hire chaplains that have gone through what we call clinical pastoral education. They have a master's degree in divinity or theological studies. They are in good standing with their faith community. And we don't come from any denominational or faith community. We really respect very carefully the choice of the patient and the family. So the chaplains would deal with the spiritual, which I often simply define as the why question of our existence. Social workers deal with those other issues that have family dynamics and emotional issues like fear, conflict, and so on. And then, of course, the nurses, healthcare aides, and our doctors deal with making sure the patient is kept physically comfortable. Because if you have a patient like this one who is indicating was very painfully uncomfortable, you're not going to be able to deal with those other issues. That's going to be what takes all of their attention and their energy, is their inability to be comfortable, having troublesome symptoms managed.
So you mentioned, that you honor the patient's wishes, obviously, but how do you honor this? How do you honor, I guess, the spiritual traditions and cultures and rituals of patients whose beliefs differ from your own while still bringing your Catholic precious blood
There's a
identity
commonality,
to it.
Patrick, in all faith communities, whether it be Buddhism, Islam, Hindu, Christianity, you name it. The commonality is we're all human and we all have common needs. So the faith community hopefully will outline for us how we address those needs. And one of the most basic needs we have as a human being is the need for hope. And this is the focus of these podcast series, isn't it? Now, it's really a little difficult to define hope in a nice, simple sort of way. But I like to look at hope as finding purpose and meaning in life. It really begins to address the why question of our existence. You know, we're really both uniquely blessed and cursed to be introspective, which means we can reflect on our own being, our own existence. My little pet can't do that, but you and I do. And like I say, it's a blessing to be able to do that, but then we have to figure out, what are we about? What's our purpose? What's our meaning? I love Mark Twain. You know, he talks about the three things on a tombstone, invariably, among other things, but there's the birth date, the death date, and what's in between? The little hyphen, as he calls it, the dash, the journey. So he'll ask that question, of those three things, which is the most important? And his conclusion is the dash, the journey. How do we live the journey of life? Then he goes on to say, in another question quote, what are the two most important days on the dash, the journey? And we want to say, well, the birth date, the beginning, and then the death date, the end. Mark Twain says, I'll agree with you about the birth date, but I will also tell you categorically the second most important day is the day we figure out why we are here. And if we can't figure out why, then it really makes it tough to get up in the morning. Because that indicates I have hope, I have meaning, I have purpose, I can figure out why I'm here. Calypso Jen sums it up well. Tiger got to hunt, bird got to fly, man got to sit and ask, why? Tiger get to rest, bird get to land, man have to tell himself he understand. That's what faith communities are supposed to help us with, to guide us on helping to come to a point of understanding what we are about. What's our purpose? What's our meaning? What's our reason for getting up in the morning? I see so many people, Patrick, who just can't figure it out. And probably the saddest thing on any tombstone could be this epitaph. Here lies someone who left this world without knowing why he or she entered it. That would be a really, really sad epitaph, wouldn't it? And a lot of people, as they come near the end of their life journey, what I call the dying role of the life journey, with a lot of living to be engaged in, this is what they want to do. And when you're looking at the most senseless, purposeless thing we have to face on the surface is death. And it takes a lot of hope, a lot of figuring out what is the meaning and the purpose of death. Is it annihilation? Is it going into nothingness? Or is it now the healing, the entrance into something much deeper and fuller? That's the ministry, I think, that above all, our chaplains and all the team in somehow, some way, deals with that. It all ties together, mens sana in corpore sano.
So, Father, let me ask you, speaking of faith and figuring out, why you're here, how do you accompany someone, excuse me, who's, I guess, wrestling with fear, with guilt, or the question, where is God in all this? How do you deal with that?
It sounds like Nietzsche a little bit you're quoting from me here. Nietzsche, I actually, in my philosophy, my degrees in philosophy and history of philosophy, I had to do a paper on Friedrich Nietzsche, the nihilistic existentialist. That's kind of a mouthful, isn't it? But one of the things he really delighted in kind of pricking away, especially the Christian community, is there is no God. There is no God. When Nietzsche died, there was a quote that was saying, Nietzsche is dead, God is still alive. So when you're looking at how do we get to the meaning and purpose, we don't do it on our own. We have to work together and have that trust and that faith that no, we're not the be-all and the end-all of our own personal existence, that we have a tie-in with each other, and above all, we have a tie-in with the God who created us. And so for us to come to an ultimate sense of defining who we are, we don't do that in isolation. We do it together. We do it with our God guiding us, the gift of the Holy Spirit. I think St. Paul, talking about hope, sums it up so well. That once we engage in that, then death is not the be-all and the end-all. As he says in 1 Corinthians, death, where is your victory? Where is your sting? Hey, I'm still around. Even though my body is compromised and gone, but who I am, I'm still around. We just have simply transcended our body. We've been transformed into a fuller way of being.
Father, are there myths out there about hospice care that
Oh,
you
God.
that you
You
wish
want another
everyone
whole
understand?
podcast on the myths of
Well,
hospice care? Oh, my goodness,
maybe,
yes.
maybe, but let's talk about
Yeah,
those
one of the
myths.
myths that I really encounter, and Jimmy Carter was such a good illustration of this particular myth. You might recall that he finally decided to go off the curative into the comfort route in February of 2023, and the media was filled with it. I'm sure they all had their obituary ready to run the next day or the next week, didn't they?
Hmm.
Like,
Yes.
this is a death sentence to get in a hospice. No. I tell people this is a life sentence because I have seen people live more fully their last 6 months of life than they did maybe their preceding 60 plus years. Because they finally got a hold of what's important and what we need to deal with to make life purposeful and meaningful, to have hope. So anyway, the other thing that really ticked me off, and I actually wrote an article to have it published, where the next line was, and he's given up all medical care. Think about that. All medical care. No, he did not give up all medical care. He changed the focus of the medical care from aggressive curative to aggressive comfort, enabling him to be kept comfortable and be able to do those things that we talked about earlier. Engaging deeply in personhood, in psychosocial, spiritual existence, in soul, in spirit living. And of course, did he die the next week, the next day? Lived a year and a half after he got on to hospice.
Hmm.
So this
Right.
is the point that I think is a myth that we got to get rid of. And then when it comes to keeping something physical comfortable, our medical director and I, we did lots of it doesn't seem we have to do so many more. The question of using morphine. Of course, we all know morphine causes pulmonary suppression, doesn't it? No, it doesn't. Yes, in the wrong hands and giving someone a really huge amount who is naive, you titrate it, you move it up to make sure the person is kept comfortable. And when it comes to the whole pulmonary function, lung function, it actually enhances their ability, if they've got air hunger, to be able to breathe easier. Because it starts opening up all of those, I don't know, all the clinical stuff, the dilation of the oxygen exchange with the blood. So rather than that myth, we kill people, that's out there the whole time. No, we don't. We keep them comfortable. So they're able to die in peace. Another myth is, I said we're going to have a whole podcast on this,
That's okay.
is the whole question of, well, hospice people starve people to death. I get the reputation in the community, well, Father Tom Welk, he advocates starving people to death. That's a bunch of nonsense. I was going to use a bad word, but you had to edit it out. No, our bodies have a natural wisdom of shutting down. And it's kind of like, I'm a farm boy from North Dakota originally. If our tractor wasn't going to be used that day and was already have a full tank of gas, we didn't have more gas in there. We just wasted. They can't use it, right? The tractor. Same way with our bodies. If they're shutting down, we're not active. Why push food and water? It makes them actually more uncomfortable. So we allow the body in its natural wisdom to shut down, and no longer do they want to eat and drink. We've got all kind of medical interventions. We've got used the feeding tube, which I advocate not to use, kind of watching your language that way. But when you're looking at this medical intervention, the bishops in their document, Ethical and Religious Directives, never use the phrase feeding tube. It is always medically assisted nutrition hydration. So yes, if they're going to benefit from that medical intervention, we use it. But if it's going to be counterproductive, making them miserable, no. For example, if you and I take in water or any kind of liquid, we got to eliminate that, don't we, Patrick? And
Yeah.
we've got 3 standard ways. I'm going to put you to the test a little bit. First one is obvious, urination, right?
Hmm.
Second one, make you think a little bit, perspiration. And what's the
Right.
third one? The lungs.
Oh,
Blow your breath on
Oh,
a cold mirror. Look at all the vapor that is now condensed into water, right?
I wouldn't have thought of that. Okay, yeah, I wouldn't have thought of
So
that.
here you've got a patient we're caring for in Harry Hines Hospice. They're not able to urinate. Their kidneys are shut down. They're not active, so no perspiration, and their lungs are shutting down. So you've got the medical means of pushing that liquid. Where's it going to go? I've seen skin burst. It goes into the lungs. That's called drowning. That's not a comfort measure. So we've got to be careful to get rid of that myth that no, we don't starve people to death. We keep them absolutely comfortable. And that comfort level is sometimes not forcing food and not forcing liquids. So anyway, I just gave you a few examples. There's others we could go into.
No, no, I those are really compelling examples. So let me ask you, speaking of those myths, what are there pastoral or ethical tensions that arise around, hospice care or treatment decisions or care goals, and how do you navigate that?
Well, I mentioned my doctoral work is medical ethics. So that latter one I talked about, the nutrition hydration one, has a lot of ethical ramifications. And I would go so far to tell you that forcing and continuing to provide medically assisted nutrition hydration can be more unethical than withholding. Because what benefit are you providing? Someone that you're going to make miserable. Even when it comes to forcing food, whether it's through mechanical medical means or making the patient eat who doesn't want to eat. Oh, I see that so often. Well, you got to eat there. You got to eat. We'll say, no, if you don't eat, right, you're going to not last very long. So we've got to be careful about not forcing those kind of issues on people that are going to be counterproductive. And that's why I call it unethical. You take Terry Schiavo. I know I'm going to raise a little bit
Yeah.
of an issue here.
Mm-hmm.
Had a massive heart attack, myocardial infarction in 1990. And they had her on all of these medical interventions to keep her body around for 15 years, and it went through all kind of litigations. I think 17 court cases, 17 adjudications. And when eventually it was allowed to stop the medical intervention, especially the medically assisted nutrition hydration, then death took place. But so many people say, well, we starved her to death. I still, very rarely now, but bumper stickers. I was working on a committee in Topeka, and sure enough, as we were debating some questions, ethical questions, there was this bumper sticker on the car. They starved Terry. And I said, I'll bet you my last dollar that person showed up at this committee hearing, sure enough. But no, when she finally died, and because of all the accusations that were being made, he beat her, Joe suffocated her, that's now the husband, Michael. The Schindler family or blood family really pushing a lot of that. What did the autopsy show? What was the cause of Terry Schiavo's death? It wasn't starvation. What the autopsy said, the coroner put on there, was she died of anoxic encephalopathy. Fancy word for saying she died of lack of oxygen to the brain that caused brain death. That was the cause of her death. Now, you're going to get into a legal dimension here, not just an ethical, asking the question, did Terry's husband, Michael, do anything to cause that lack of oxygen? Then it would get it to be a homicide. It would be a legal question. Coroner said, I can't tell 15 years from examining the body whether or not there was any of that, but there were no broken bones, there was nothing along that line. But what he did put in the report was, you can still pull it up, it's about 37 pages, was that she was admitted to the hospital for the heart attack, and that would be the manner of her death. That's what would cause the brain death, the lack of oxygen to the brain. So no legal ramifications whatsoever. So your little crossover here between the ethical and the legal is what I'm talking about here, Patrick.
Speaking of that case, many families wait too long. They
Oh yeah, that's another myth. You got to be imminently dying before you get appropriate for hospice. But go on.
Yes, let's talk about that. So, what signs suggest that it's time to consider hospice, and how can earlier referrals restore dignity and control?
We have so many families that tell us when their loved one finally dies, and they're really appreciative of the care, the support we've provided. who come down with this point of, we wish we had called you sooner. We wish we had called you sooner. It would have made life so much fuller and easier to live if we had called you sooner and given us all that support. But yeah, it would be very... You can start again with the legal issue here. Medicare makes it very clear for someone to be appropriately admitted to a hospice program and get reimbursement from Medicare, two physicians have to indicate that they now have a limited life expectancy. 6 months or less is what they put on their conditions of participation. They don't necessarily have to absolutely die like Jimmy Carter lived 1.5 years, right? So when it comes down to it, what I tell physicians is, would it surprise you if your patient died in 6 months or less? Oh, absolutely not. Wouldn't surprise me at all. Then that would be appropriate for you to certify, and you're not going to get in trouble for fraudulently making this certification that they're appropriate. So that's the key. The doctors, we cannot admit anyone into our care unless the doctor writes it. You can't get into a hospital without a doctor admitting. Same way here. You can't get into hospice unless a doctor admits you to the care of our program. So that would be the key. If they perchance the illness progresses much more slowly than had been thought, there are sort of recertification periods after the initial 6 months. So what the key is, we need to document decline, even if it's very incremental. And that Medicare would say, you're appropriately caring for that. There are many for-profit hospices, by the way, who are in it for the bottom line, the money, who've been fined huge sums of money for fraudulently admitting patients. In the 43 years that I've been involved here, we have not paid a red cent in fines. I always tell people, as long as I'm around here, the two things that will never, ever be compromised on is we're going to provide the best quality of care, no matter what it costs, and secondly, we're going to do it with integrity. No answer ifs about that.
So, Father, this industry, I assume, is a very emotionally taxing.
Charged issue, yep.
Yes, absolutely. So
I go out and give talks and nobody ever shows up because hospice equals death.
Yeah.
Our culture is very denying.
So how do you guard against that? How do you stay compassionate while without I guess burning out?
You got to take care of yourself. There's no question about that. And I do a lot of workshops, especially during the COVID years, for medical professionals on burnout, compassion fatigue, and so on. And I try to get rid of this whole thing about, if you're doing this work, you got to be selfless. You got to really do anything and everything. I'd say if you don't take care of yourself, you're going to be in deep trouble. You're not going to last. So I ask them a physiological question. To what organ must the heart first pump blood? The physicians all, well, to the brain, obviously. And so I said, really? And they start thinking about it some more. To what organ must the heart first pump blood? To itself.
Oh.
If the heart does not take care of itself, as vital as other organs are from the brain on through, that ain't going to happen. There's nothing selfish about self-care. We got to take care of ourselves first. Even when you get on a plane and the attendants, the airline attendants tell you about the need for oxygen, the mask drops down and you've got an infant in your lap, where do you put the mask first? On yourself.
On yourself.
On yourself. Because that infant can't do it. If you get incapacitated, the infant's gone too. So when it comes down to it, taking care of yourself is vital to maintaining this. Yeah, you're exactly right. We've hired many a staff over the year. They're not suited for it. They just last maybe a few weeks. And then I've got staff around this office here that have been here for almost the same amount of years I have. No one's not as long-termer as I am, Patrick, so they can't compete. So
No, they cannot.
I'm not an old-timer. I'm a long-timer.
There you go. I like that. So, Father, has your work reshaped or fortified your understanding of redemption or the Paschal mystery or this precious blood spirituality?
The precious blood spirituality ties in very, very closely with the Paschal mystery. Paschal mystery has two very significant events to it. Holy Week, the Triduum. The two basic events we all remember are Good Friday and Easter. Excuse me. If you look at it in terms of how they connect, they are vitally interconnected. If you just look at each one in isolation, and what we want as a culture is, we want an Easter. We want a la-di-da life without any price. That ain't going to happen. But yet you can go the other direction. You can concentrate on Good Friday. Good Friday without an Easter makes no sense either. So the two are interconnected. There can be no Easter without a Good Friday, and a Good Friday without an Easter makes no sense. That's the mystery of life. That's the mystery of moving on and changing and growing. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in her last book, she wrote a lot about dying and death. What was the title of her last book? Death, the final stage of growth. Death, the final stage of living fully, is what we're really talking about here. So yes, the precious blood spirituality and the very concept of blood is life. Probably heard that before on podcasts with some of our other members. But in the scriptures, we often equate life with, blood with death, because we've got so much blood shed violently. But for them, the whole concept was, here's an animal that was vibrant and alive, and then all of a sudden it's gone. What happened? Well, the blood's gone. Where did the life go? Into that blood that was shed. So this is the Paschal mystery in the summation, that we want to make sure that life is lived fully. That's hospice ministry, right to the very last breath, and then it changes and transforms into an even fuller way of living. If we can get that across in our world, and I talked about earlier about reconciliation, I think we have a lot better world around us. The giving of life, it fosters life. It doesn't diminish it.
So Father, what do you hope that people take away about God's love and mercy through hospice care?
I think that the old saying was a little girl who was afraid to go to bed one night, and the parents were trying to console her, and so they told her, well, God will take care of you. God is watching you. And the little girl says, but my God has to have a little bit of flesh. And so I think we give witness to the mystery of God's love for us by what we do for one another. I think the Johannine theology says it well. For us to say we love our sisters and brothers, that we love God but don't love our sisters and brothers is nonsense. You can't love God without loving one another. All ties together into one big, beautiful gift of life, one big circle of life. And I see our God, and this is another part of my ministry. By the way, I don't do an extensive amount of patient care. Most of my work is seminars and workshops, teaching, and so on. But when I do provide it, I find so many patients are so absolutely afraid of dying because the wrath of God may be visited upon them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I try to assure them, if they're parents especially, and said, oh, your kids were all angels and never went astray, oh, they start laughing. So when they decided to come back, they said, nope, get out of here, I don't want to ever see you again. Oh, no, I embraced them, I gave them a big hug. He says, well, God tells us, we saw it last Sunday in the reading. I don't know, you're going to be showing this podcast later, but the reading was that we wanted to take care of, and Jesus says, if you, with all your shortcomings and failings, take care of each other, how much more so our God is an absolutely perfectly loving God. God, this guy can't wait to embrace you, as I tell with these patients. Can't wait to give you a big hug when you finally enter into that fuller presence of our God. That seems to bring them a lot of peace. Be able to realize, no, you don't have to be afraid about the wrath of God. What they really need to be looking forward to is the love of God. And I've had so many patients that I've had to deal with who finally get to that point of accepting that and can't wait to die then. I said, no, we don't want to rush it either,
Okay, Father, and that's extremely poignant. I would not have thought of it that way. So how does your work bring? The precious blood has a call to bring hope and healing to a wounded world, and obviously you're doing that. But can you expand on that a little bit in terms of the work that you do?
When I do this kind of work, I think when you first approached me, I touched on this point, where some of the medical professionals talk about not shattering hope. And that means we don't always want to share with the patient that things might be on the grim side in terms of their life-limiting illness, be it cancer or whatever. And I think that what they're really equating is not when they say don't want to shatter hope, is they want to now not have this patient do what's necessary to deal with the illness, to fight it. And they also then bring unrealistic expectations to bear. And they make promises they cannot fill. And when the patient finally dies, there's a lot of anger about that. What patients need to hear is that, yeah, there was a study done in Roswell Park Memorial Institute in Buffalo, New York. A profound study as far as I'm concerned. And it had 25 need statements that they had patients in a middle illness of a terminal life-limiting illness. See, there's the first phase is the crisis when you hear the news, the middle is when you're dealing curatively, and then the terminal phase where no, they're actively dying. So these people were given these 25 need statements regarding hope, regarding honesty, regarding information, regarding discussion, and emotional support. And of those 5 hope statements, the very first one was, I hope for a cure. Well, once they have no longer able to do that, by the way, the honesty and the info statements also had statements, don't give me the information, I don't want honesty, I don't want all of the details. All of those were in the bottom 5. Those patients said, I want honesty, I want the information. So one was hope, the other 3 were honesty and info. And then the rest of them were all the hope statements. And they were all centered in on what we've been talking about. Statements, I want to make sure my life has meaning. I want to be sure I'm comfortable. I'm sure my loved ones are going to be taken care of. All of those are the hope statements. Those are the ones that we try to address with our patients and our families. So that it's a limited amount of time when you're entering the dying role, but it's also a very precious time. A precious time to live life as fully and as well as possible. And if we can provide the support for them to achieve those, that's ministry. That's precious about spirituality. That's putting things in order. That's making wholeness and holiness.
Father, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
being our guest. This has again been
Well, good luck in your
a
editing.
sobering. Yes, it's been a sobering, very sobering, but hopeful conversation.
You sum it up
This has
well.
been
Sobering doesn't necessarily dash hope.
perfect. Father Tom Welk, thank you very much. Missionaries of the Precious Blood. This is Restoring Hope. If you want to learn more about the Missionaries of the Precious Blood, we are at preciousbloodus.org, and we're also on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Again, our guest today has been Father Tom Welk. Thank you for joining us, and Father, we hope to talk to you again soon.